Now, as you guys know, tonight we're jumping into Jordan Peterson, rule number 4 analysis. What we've been doing is we've been going through Jordan Peterson's 12 rules for life. We've been analyzing and critiquing his 12 rules. How biblical are they? How much do they line up with the Bible? Okay? And it's very interesting. We've gotten good results thus far. Gone through 3 rules. Today is rule number 4. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. And I think this is a really good rule to examine. I think it's the sort of thing that if you can get it right, is going to make a big difference in your life. So we want to make sure that we have a good understanding of whether or not this is biblical, whether or not it actually lines up. He says, no matter how good you are at something or how you rank in your accomplishments, there is someone out there who makes you look incompetent. I kind of like that. That's just an element of humility, right? Recognizing that there are others out there who have bested you, improved upon you. This is all the more true in an internet age. I could imagine 50 years ago, even if you were only halfway decent, you might be the best musician in town. But in today's day and age, I can download music from the best musicians in the world and listen to it on my phone. And because of that, it's really shrunk our world in the sense of expertise and brilliancy. Now there's a much better understanding, I think, generally, of how people rank amongst their peers out there in the world. And so I think this is just an interesting one. I think if you can grasp this one properly, it breeds a sense of humility. I might have been really smart in my tiny hometown, but compared to the world at large, I don't know what I'm talking about. Right? So I think that's a helpful one to breed some humility, right? I think that's a good one. But that's not the first one I want to analyze. The first one I want to analyze is this. Listen to this. Guys, have you heard of the discussions between equality of outcome and equality of opportunity? Back and forth you go, right? Equality of outcome versus equality of opportunity. Well, here Jordan Peterson leads full force into equality of opportunity. Listen to what he says. He says this: we are not equal in ability or outcome and never will be. Well, he's told us where he stands. We are not equal in ability or outcome and never will be. A very small number of people produce very much of everything. The winners don't take all, but they take most, and the bottom is not a good place to be. People are unhappy at the bottom, they get sick there, and remain unknown and unloved. They waste their lives there, and they die there. End quote. So, Jordan Peterson states fully, explicitly, guys, it's equality of outcome, not equality of opportunity. Equality of outcome is what we desire, and equality of opportunity isn't possible, never will be. Okay? That's what he states. Is this concept biblical? I know this is a little political, and I'm not trying to be political, but is this concept biblical? We're never equal and we never will be. Well, Jesus said an interesting thing in John 12. John 12, verse 8, he says this. I'll start in verse 7. Jesus said, leave her alone so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you will always have with you, but you do not always have me. Jesus says the poor we will always have with us. What does that mean? Equality of outcome, I don't think, is fully achievable in this lifetime, this side of heaven. Now, I want to make a caveat. That doesn't mean we should strive for it. Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount to be perfect as my Father in heaven is perfect. And so I think it is appropriate and wise to strive for ideals that sometimes transcend us. But that doesn't mean we're always going to achieve them. When Peterson says, we are not equal in ability or outcome and never will be. A very small number of people produce very much of everything. The winners don't take all, but they take most, and the bottom is not a good place to be. People are unhappy at the bottom. They get sick there and remain unknown and unloved. They waste their lives there. They die there. Guys, I gotta say, I think this idea lines up with the Bible. I think this is clearly in line with the scriptures, and I think Jesus is indicating as much here. So I'm gonna give this one an A, guys. An A for point number 1 with Jordan Peterson on rule number 4. I got to give him an A, guys. I got to give him an A. Peterson's point number 2 in this chapter. He says this. I think this is interesting. He's talking about relationships between human beings and skills and abilities and all of those things. He says this. We might start by considering the all too black and white words themselves. Success or failure. You are either a success, a comprehensive, singular, overall good thing, or its opposite, a failure, a comprehensive, singular, irredeemably bad thing. The words imply no alternative and no middle ground. However, in a world as complex as ours, such generalizations, really, such failure to differentiate, are a sign of naive, unsophisticated, or even malevolent analysis. There are vital degrees and gradations of value obliterated by this binary system, and the consequences are not good. End quote. So my second question is the question of false binaries. The question of false binaries. Now, this is a very interesting one. What he's saying is when we define things in terms of success or failure, we don't do justice to the complexity of the world in which we live. Success compared to what? Failure compared to what? Instead, we need to recognize that society is a matter of gradation, and we should measure ourselves based upon where we land in that gradation and adjust to those approaches. Now, I struggle with this one a little bit because Jesus does set up a binary. Let's check out the binary that Jesus sets up. And I want you guys to ask yourselves this. Is the binary that Jesus sets up here a false binary that is in contrast to Peterson, or something that is different that maybe Peterson's point here could be commensurate with? Okay, that's what I want you to ask yourself. Let's go ahead and read. Jesus says this, whoever is not with me is against me, and whoever does not gather with me scatters. Therefore I tell you, every sin and blasphemy will be forgiven of people, but the blasphemy against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven. Okay? Notice the binary he sets up. He says, if you're not with me, you're against me. And he says, if you do not gather with me, you scatter. It's kind of a binary, right? He's essentially saying there's no neutral ground. There's no happy medium that you can take where you're saying, well, I'm pretty neutral when it comes to Jesus. No, either you're with him or you're against him. Either you gather together with him or you scatter. That's what he says. But that seems to run counter to what Peterson says. He says, look, this is too black and white, and there's no middle ground. Well, here's what I would say, guys, in regards to Peterson. I think the concepts that are being talked about here are different. Jesus is talking about aligning yourself with him in your life, okay? Whereas Peterson is talking about relative measures of success or failure. The big difference here is that Peterson's categories are self-defined, okay? You set up for yourself what is success and what is failure. And Peterson's concern is that you don't set a false binary up for yourself such that you mark something out as success and something out as failure that you can't achieve, and so you always beat down on yourself and call yourself an interminable failure. That's Peterson's concern. Whereas Jesus's concern is this. Jesus is saying all of life is moral. All of life has consequences. You don't get to occupy some middle ground where you're neutral and your actions don't affect your relationship to me or to good or evil, right? That's what Jesus is saying. And so I don't think this really aligns necessarily with what Peterson is talking about here. And because of that, I don't think I should mark Peterson down for a false binary. I think he's making a statement that makes sense. I think sometimes we do impose these sorts of weights upon ourselves that aren't in line with the scriptures. And oftentimes we do this in religious fears. I'm not good enough. God doesn't love me. Jesus could never love me, etc. Well, those ideas, I'm a failure versus a success, aren't in line with what Jesus has to define. And so we should let Jesus define what our successes and failures are rather than setting them up for ourselves. Okay? And so on this one, I got to give Peterson an A. I think this is something, especially if you do any sort of Christian counseling, you'll have to wrestle with, because people often set up their own ideas of success and failure and then compare themselves to those and deem themselves to be failures when in reality they're not. So I like this one. I think it's in line with scriptural ideas, and I have to give Peterson an A on it. All right, guys, let's go on to point number 3 that Peterson makes in this chapter, okay? And it has to do with growth. I think this is very interesting. Here's what he says. He's essentially saying, you're defining success and failure. And what he's saying is you have several pursuits in life. You're pursuing several things. You're doing thing 1, thing 2, thing 3, etc. And he says you have to define success and failure along each of those axes, right? And when you begin to do that, you need to be ensuring that some of your goals are high enough that it causes you to grow in the process of seeking them out. So I'll just read what he has to say, and then we'll try to talk about it from a biblical perspective. He says this: it's also unlikely that you're playing only one game. You have a career, and friends, and family members, and personal projects, and artistic endeavors, and athletic pursuits. You might consider judging your success across all the games you play. Imagine that you are very good at some, middling at others, and terrible at the remainder. Perhaps that's how it should be. You might object, I should be winning at everything. But winning at everything might only mean that you're not doing anything new or difficult. You might be winning, but you're not growing. And growing might be the most important form of winning. Should victory in the present always take precedence over trajectory across time? End quote. I think that's super insightful, guys. I love here when he says winning at everything might only mean you're not doing anything new or difficult. You might be winning, but you're not growing, and growing might be the most important form of winning. So a high priority placed here on growing. A high priority placed here on improving, bettering yourself, getting better across the board, right? So, is this in line with biblical values? Well, I think it is, guys. I think he has just stated sanctification in different words. If we go to James 1:2 and just read 2 to 4, we're going to see here that trials, struggles, striving is a good thing. And this contributes to our sanctification and growth. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kind. What? That's counterintuitive. James says, take joy when things are hard. Okay, why? Why would that be the case, James? That's weird. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you might be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. What James is saying is that trials bring about character development that improves you to such an extent that you are better off, that you grow. Let's just line that up with Peterson. Winning at everything might only mean that you're not doing anything new or difficult. You might be winning, but you're not growing, and growing might be the most important form of winning. Come on, guys. It's the same idea. It's the exact same idea as James. James says try to get into those difficult situations in life because it means you're going to grow. And that's exactly what Peterson said. So, on this topic, growth or sanctification, guys, I got to give Peterson an A+. Got to give him an A+. He's doing great thus far. So far, 3 quotes into rule number 4, equality of outcome, false binaries, and growth and sanctification. I gave him an A, and an A+. Guys, rule number 4 is faring very well thus far. His 4th point in this chapter has to do with the idea of setting up your life habits, okay? And I think this is really interesting. So he starts talking about, all right, you need to set yourself up some life habits that are going to help you to strive for the best, that are going to help you to achieve the best in your life. Okay. He says this, you could watch the precious days tick by, or you could learn how to entice yourself into sustainable, productive activity. Do you ask yourself what you want? Do you negotiate fairly with yourself? Or are you a tyrant with yourself as slave? Okay. And he continues a little bit later. Your career or job works for you in a personal manner, or it does not, and it does so in a unique interplay with the other specifics of your life. You must decide how much of your time to spend on this and how much on that. You must decide what to let go and what to pursue. So here's his call. Look, it's up to you to set the priorities in your life. You've got to figure out, what are you going to spend the most time on? What are you going to focus your energy on? What are you going to focus your attention on? That's up to you. You have to decide. Your destiny is in your hands. That's essentially what he is saying. Now, I couldn't think of a specific Bible verse that would be related to this idea. You know, the Bible generally tells us things like Joshua says, choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So that idea is definitely thrown out there. But I also thought about this quote. I heard this from Paul Washer a long time ago. This is a quote from G.D. Watson called, "Others may, but you cannot." Others may, but you cannot. And the idea here is you have to construct and orient your life in such a way as you recognize that you're following the Lord and he calls you to live your life in a certain pattern. So I want to read this quote and let's see if this lines up with Peterson's ideas. He says this, "If God has called you to really be like Jesus, he will draw you into a life of crucifixion and humility and put upon you such demands of obedience that you will not be able to follow other people or measure yourself by other Christians. And in many ways, he will seem to let other good people do things which he will not let you do." Interesting. Other Christians and ministers who seem very religious and useful may push themselves, pull wires, and work schemes to carry out their plans, but you cannot do it. And if you attempt it, you will meet with such failure and rebuke from the Lord as to make you sorely penitent. Others may boast of themselves, of their work, of their success, of their writings, but the Holy Spirit will not allow you to do any such thing. And if you begin it, he will lead you into some deep mortification that will make you despise yourself and all of your works. Others may be allowed to succeed in making money, or may have left legacy to them, but it is likely God will keep you poor because he wants you to have something far better than gold, namely, a helpless dependence on him, that he may have the privilege of supplying your needs day by day out of an unseen treasury. The Lord may let others be honored and put forward and keep you hidden in obscurity because he wants you to produce some choice, fragrant fruit for his coming glory, which can only be produced in the shade. He may let others be great, but keep you small. He may let others do a work for him and get the credit for it, but he will make you to work and toil on without knowing how much you are doing. And then to make your work still more precious, he may let others get the credit for the work which you have done, and thus make your reward 10 times greater than Jesus comes. The Holy Spirit will put a strict watch over you with a jealous love, and will rebuke you for little words and feelings, or for wasting your time, which other Christians never seem distressed over. So make up your mind that God is an infinite sovereign, that he has the right to do as he pleases with his own. He may not explain to you 1,000 things which puzzle your reason in his dealings with you, but if you absolutely sell yourself to his love slave, he will wrap you up in a jealous love and bestow upon you many blessings which come only to those who are in the inner circle. Settle it forever then, that you are to deal directly with the Holy Spirit, and that he is to have the privilege of tying your tongue, or chaining your hand, or closing your eyes, in ways that he does not seem to use with others. Now when you are so possessed with the loving God that you are in your secret heart pleased and delighted over this peculiar, personal, private, jealous guardianship and management of the Holy Spirit over your life, you will have found the vestibule of heaven. G.D. Watson, Living Words. End quote. So I like this because he talks about owning your own walk with God. Owning your own personal relationship with God. How many times have I been talking to other Christians? How many times have I been interacting with people who are seeking to walk the narrow way, the pathway of faith? And they constantly compare themselves to other Christians. How are they doing? How are they going? Should I live my life after their pattern? Should I follow in their way? And I love what G.D. Watson says here, because he's essentially saying, look, you got to follow God in your life. You got to follow how the Spirit is leading you, and not just follow what other people say about him. And when I compare that to what Peterson is saying, it sounds remarkably similar. You must decide how much of your time to spend on this and how much on that. You must decide what to let go and what to pursue. And so, set your own life habits. What does Peterson get from me on this one? I got to give him an A. I got to give him an A. It's an important, I think, Christian principle when it comes to living your life in this world. And I think that Peterson notes it. He uses different words, of course, but it's the same idea. You have got to walk your own walk. Guys, nobody's living your Christian life for you. You can't coast into heaven on the coattails of your pastor. You can't get into heaven riding in the passenger seat of your youth pastor's car. You can't make it into heaven relying upon the arguments and faith of others. Instead, choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. It's up to you. You got to make that decision. You've got to make that step of faith for yourself. And you can't do that because somebody else is doing it. And so, yeah, I like this one. I got to give Peterson an A on it. I got to give him an A on it. Very Christian principle. Let's jump on to the next point. And he also, just as an aside, he makes some comments where he seems to reference almost presuppositional apologetics ideas. All of these I really like. He makes comments like, what remained hidden from you by your presuppositions and preconceptions was made clear. That's so presuppositional, right? He talks about Ivan Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment and says, look, you're not a real atheist if you don't live like Ivan does in Crime and Punishment. I like it, right? And he says, you don't understand anything. You didn't know you were blind. Let's just look at these ones real quick. Pretty funny. Okay? He makes this note. Let's see. I want to catch it. What you aim at determines what you see. That's worth repeating. What you aim at determines what you see. That's very presuppositional, guys. Your glasses or lens through which you are viewing the world determines what is salient to you. What's going to grab your attention. Okay? And so, yeah, very, very good there. I thought this one was interesting. You might object, but I'm an atheist. No, you're not. And if you want to understand this, you should read Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, perhaps the greatest novel ever written, in which the main character, Raskolnikov, decides to take his atheism with true seriousness, commits what he has rationalized as benevolent murder, and pays the price. You're simply not an atheist in your actions that most accurately reflect your deepest beliefs. Those that are implicit, embedded in your being, underneath your conscious apprehensions and articulable attitudes and surface-level self-knowledge. Again, this is the idea, guys, that your actions speak louder than your words. Okay? You can only find out what you actually believe rather than what you think you believe by watching how you act. You are too complex to understand yourself. Or even this further quote, you don't understand anything. You didn't even know you were blind. Guys, I like all these quotes. All these quotes are very consistent with an idea of presuppositional apologetics. And so I gotta throw some love up for them. I don't think these are necessarily biblical categories per se, but they're very interesting ideas. Okay, very interesting ideas. That your actions speak louder than your words and things like that. Now, he had this section where he talks about happiness. Okay? And I thought this was very, very interesting, guys. Because here he talks about happiness. And he says, happiness, perhaps, is always found in the journey uphill and not in the fleeting sense of satisfaction awaiting the next peak. Much of happiness is hope, no matter how deep the underworld in which that hope was conceived. This is a very interesting concept. Essentially, he's focusing on the journey rather than the destination. And that hope aspect, which is one of the Apostle Paul's triads, right? Faith, hope, and love, according to Paul. He ties a lot of your happiness up in hope, which I think is a very good concept, right? Very, very helpful for us to understand. And then a little bit later, he essentially talks about, he says this, 500 small decisions, 500 tiny actions compose your day, today, and every day. Could you aim one or two of these at a better result? Better in your own private opinion, by your own individual standards? Could you compare your specific personal tomorrow with your specific personal yesterday? Could you use your own judgment and ask yourself what that better tomorrow might be? Now, I think this is a good one, guys, and I want to stop here for a second because a lot of people might hear that language and bristle at it. Your own standards? Your own beliefs? Your own approach? No, we organize our standards and beliefs by God. Yes, of course, but let's get a proper balance here, right? And the balance is, the context in which Peterson is talking is he's not comparing your standards to God's standards. What he's doing is calling you to compare your life to itself, its own trajectory. He doesn't want you to compare yourself to some rich, famous, really got themselves together person. He wants you to compare yourself with your own life's trajectory so you can improve incrementally on your own life, right? And Coach nailed it here. This is actually maybe the heartbeat of the whole chapter, and I think this is very important. It says this in 2 Corinthians 10:12. For we are not bold to class or compare ourselves with some of those who commend themselves, but when they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they are without understanding. Here's the point of Paul in this passage. Comparing yourself by yourself doesn't actually lend to insight, understanding, and improvement. And oftentimes this can happen in both directions. Either you compare yourself to somebody who really has their act together and you feel like garbage for it, or you compare yourself to somebody who doesn't have their act together at all and you feel no need to improve because after all, you're doing a lot better than them. And I think that's what the Apostle Paul is getting at here. He's saying this gives you a lack of understanding. Instead, and this is in line with what Peterson is talking about, not opposed to it. Instead, Peterson says, you should compare yourself to your own trajectory, how you're improving in your life, and make sure you continue to improve on it day by day. And so I think as the overall thrust of the chapter, this is very in line with biblical principles. Right here, 2 Corinthians 10:12, don't compare yourself to others. I got to give Peterson an A. So I think that's a good one, and it's in line with what the Apostle Paul is talking about. On the next one, Peterson goes into the topic of behaviors. Religion as behavior. Okay? This is something I think is very interesting. Listen to what he has to say. He says, religion concerns itself not with mere right and wrong, but with good and evil themselves, with the archetypes of right and wrong. Religion concerns itself with the domain of value, ultimate value. This is not the scientific domain. It's not the territory of empirical description. The people who wrote and edited the Bible, for example, weren't scientists. I think that's very true, right? But he continues with it. Religion is instead about proper behavior. It's about what Plato called the good. A genuine religious acolyte isn't trying to formulate accurate ideas about the objective nature of the world, although he might be trying to do that too. He's striving instead to be a good person. It may be the case that to him, good means nothing but obedient, and even blindly obedient. Hence the classic liberal Western Enlightenment objection to religious belief. Obedience isn't enough, but it's at least a start. And we have forgotten this. You cannot aim yourself at anything if you are completely undisciplined and untutored. It is therefore necessary and desirable for religions. Oh, we'll get onto this dogmatism here in a second. So that's his next point. It's very interesting. And if you guys have been interacting with our material regarding Ian McGilchrist and the left and right hemispheres of the brain, hopefully you heard a lot of left and right hemisphere language here. What Peterson is articulating at this point is that religion is concerned with the right hemisphere. Again, it's not a scientific domain. That's left hemisphere. Those who wrote the Bible weren't scientists, left hemisphere. Religion is about proper behavior, right hemisphere. They're striving to be a good person. Obedience, right hemisphere. Living out the right way of being. This is a very important idea, and I think in Protestant circles, we have lost this nuance. Our Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox brothers and sisters encapsulate this a little bit better with their value they place on ritual and observance of religious rites, ceremony, going through liturgy, ordinances, and sacraments. These are all about living the right ways. These are proper behavior. This is acting appropriately in the right hemisphere domain. And what Peterson is trying to return us to is, hey, stop thinking about religion with the left hemisphere alone. It's not just about these propositional truths that you must believe or not believe. Instead, it is about participatory knowing, okay? Participatory knowledge, acting out Christianity in your life. That's what matters. Ritual observance, ceremony, sacraments, ordinances. Walk these things out in your life. And in many ways, I think us Protestants have the hardest time of embracing these ideas. Because the goal was to make Christianity much more rationally coherent and consistent. Because, face it, Protestantism was tied up with the Enlightenment. And they're inextricably bound together. Such that we made Christianity a lot more about the left hemisphere in Protestant circles. And here, Peterson swings the pendulum almost the other direction. And says, guys, look, religion is about the right hemisphere. It's about acting out the right things in life. And this is why when asked, Peterson will often get asked, do you believe in God? And he will constantly say this, I act or live as though God exists. Why? Because for Peterson, religion is about proper behavior. That's why he says, I act or live as though God exists. So very important distinction for Peterson here. And I think it is a good correction to a lot of Protestant perspectives. But, as much as I love Peterson, I got to give him a C on this. And the reason is because I happen to think also that the propositional truth and left hemisphere of it is true as well. I do not think that you can minimize religion's contribution to just acting the right behaviors. It is that, but it isn't only that. It's more than that. And I think this is one of the areas where Peterson falls a little bit short for me. I like what he has to say, don't get me wrong. You can see I've given him tons of spectacular grades across the board. A+, A. But he's falling short on this one. It's about the right hemisphere, but Christianity is also true with the left hemisphere. And I want to integrate both. Now, I do think Peterson provides a healthy corrective to Protestants who would make Christianity all about logical propositions. So I think practically applying this perspective to individuals who are bent on just pure theological truths can be helpful. But the fact of the matter is we need to integrate both, and I think Peterson falls a little bit short on this one because I do think it also happens to be propositionally true, right? Fuzz puts it this way: Christian religion is about both the outside and the inside. That's correct, and I like that. Now, again, we do minimize the outside at times. Listen to Matthew 5, right? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the merciful. These are all actions and activities you take with your life. So these are absolutely relevant. And we need to improve this area of Christians, especially Protestant Christians. You're the salt of the earth, but if salt loses its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? These are important, but they're not the only important part. Next one, guys. Dogmatism. I was happy to read this, and I'll tell you why. In his debate with Sam Harris, they talked about dogmatism, and they both said dogmatism was bad. And I have since said, I don't agree. I think that's too black and white, and here's why. Because dogmatism in religion is part of what provides the transformational power of the religion itself. Religion is partially transformation. That's what it's about. Not all of it, but some of it. And if you strip all of the dogmatism from a religion, you also strip from it all of its transformative power. And so, I loved this comment. Listen to what he says. He says, it is therefore necessary and desirable for religions to have a dogmatic element. What good is a value system that does not provide a stable structure? Boom. Love it. Gotta give him an A. And I think it's very important to recognize that a dogmatic element is important in religion. We can't strip dogmatism entirely from the faith itself. Why? Because dogmatism is what transforms. If you have a value system that always bends to your will, your wishes, and your whims, it can't be transformative. If you always impact certain values and you don't give them room to transform you, you'll instead just adjust the values. And instead, the Bible says this, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. It can only happen through dogma, guys. That by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. This can only happen by dogma. You can't do this if your system of values is so fluid as to not provide that transformative element. So I'm glad that Peterson noted this, because previously I've heard him say something that sounded the opposite of it, and we can't lose dogma. It's too essential to the transformation of the value system. All right, guys, one more thing I want to talk about on this chapter. He started comparing the Old Testament God with the New Testament God. Oh, no. Oh, no. And you guys know how we feel about this one. Listen to this. The God of the Old Testament can appear harsh, judgmental, unpredictable, and dangerous, particularly on a cursory reading. Now there's enough caveats in there. Can appear, he says. Cursory reading, he says. Okay, I can hear what he's saying, right? I can hear what he's saying. And then listen to the contrast. Listen to the contrast, right? New Testament God is often presented as a different character. Although the book of Revelation, with its final judgment, warns against any excessively naive complacency, Oh, okay. All right. He says, look, New Testament God can be judgment as well. Okay. But he is more the kindly Geppetto, master craftsman and benevolent father. He wants nothing for us but the best. He's all loving, all forgiving. Sure, he'll send you to hell if you misbehave badly enough. Fundamentally, however, he's the God of love. And I was like, guys, I was reading. I was like, no, you're not going to do this. You're not going to do this to me. Now, again, he nuanced each individual statement well enough. But when you put them together, it's like, you're going to make this old distinction between Old Testament God, New Testament God. This is classic in, kind of like liberal theologian type of circles, right? And to see Peterson doing it hurt me. It hurt me a lot. So I was reading and I was just struggling. I was like, I can't believe he's doing this. But watch where he goes, guys. He then begins to kind of walk through this idea. He starts to combine the Old and New Testament. And he starts to say, hey, we've got a broader perspective, a broader picture going on here. Listen, in the Jewish Old Testament, the book of divine justice, there are men, things, and speeches on such a grand style that Greek and Indian literature has nothing to compare with. One stands with fear and reverence before those stupendous remains of what man was formerly. And one has sad thoughts about old Asia and its little outpushed peninsula in Europe. To have bound up this New Testament, a kind of rococo of taste in every respect, along with the Old Testament into one book as the Bible, as the book in itself, is perhaps the greatest audacity and sin against the spirit which literary Europe has on its conscience. Do you hear what he's saying there? He's like, this was audacious, right? Now, of course, he probably has literary criticism types of ideas wrapped up in his mind with how these come together. But he is noting this concept of taking the Bible as a whole, which I appreciate. Okay? All right, he says, how are you going to sort yourself out in your life? Because, again, the whole chapter is about comparing yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who somebody else is today. What does he say? This is very interesting to me. Listen to how he brings this together. Better means to aim at the improvement of being with a capital I and a capital B. Thinking all of this, really realizing all of this, you take a risk. Listen, you decide that you will start treating Old Testament God with all his terrible and oft arbitrary seeming power as if he could also be the New Testament God, even though you understand the many ways in which that is absurd. In other ways, you decide to act as if existence might be justified by its goodness, if only you behaved properly. And it is that decision, that declaration of existential faith that allows you to overcome nihilism and resentment and arrogance. It is that declaration of faith that keeps hatred of being, with all of its attendant evils, at bay. And as for such faith, it is not at all the will to believe things that you know perfectly well to be false. Faith is not the childish belief in magic, that is ignorance or even willful blindness. It is instead the realization that the tragic irrationalities of life must be counterbalanced by an equally irrational commitment to the essential goodness of being. End quote. So I was like, I had all this angst, right? He's like, Old Testament God, New Testament God. He was going back and forth. And then he united them together, and he united them under the banner of faith. Now, there's still a few statements in here that as an evangelical Christian, I take pause at. But man, that was refreshing to see him put them together, right? Because I was nervous at first. And of course, I'm going to take Peterson for who he is. I'm not going to try to judge him by my standards and say, you have to line up with everything I say. But he did put them together. And he put them together under the banner of faith and said, look, part of faith is recognizing that Old Testament and New Testament God are one God in the same. And you know what? I can profoundly appreciate that. So I liked that. I liked that a lot. I was ready to give him a D on this one, right? I was ready to really bring down the hammer. And I felt like he did a good job. You know, again, he did it in his terms. Even though you understand the many ways in which that is absurd, he did it on his own terms. That's fine. But in the final analysis, he put the two together, which is what the Bible does, which is what the Christian tradition does. And so that kind of brings up everything I wanted to talk about on this one. Again, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. So when it comes to Old Testament and New Testament God united, I got to give him a B. I got to give him a B. He had me super concerned. I thought I was going to have to give him a D. But then he did put them together under the banner of faith, which there's a lot of Christian truth in that. Now, again, he couched it in certain terms that I don't know necessarily that our tradition 100% agrees with. But he put them together, and he didn't pit Old Testament God against New Testament God, which I really appreciated. So, final analysis. Don't compare yourselves to others. 2 Corinthians 10:12, that's an A. A for sure. Old Testament and New Testament God, B. Dogmatic element being transformative, A. Religion being about proper behavior, C. I'd love to see the left hemisphere integrated as well. Also, talking about setting your own life habits, A. Growth and sanctification, A+. False binaries, A. Equality of outcome, A. My final grade for Jordan Peterson on rule number 4, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. I gave him an A-. Fantastic grade in my opinion. A-, summarizing all of our previous grades. Look, guys, from a fundamental perspective, here's the facts of the matter. As a Christian, if you compare yourself to super Christians of biographies of Christian heroes in the past, you will feel like you can never live up to those standards. And as such, you'll never even get started. You'll never even try. If you compare yourselves to cultural Christians, maybe in your church, maybe in your current society, who aren't even doing the bare minimum, and you say to yourself, well, hey, I'm doing better than them at least, you won't ever strive to improve. You won't ever strive to get better because the standard you're comparing to, you already beat. Instead, I like this principle. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. Christian, where were you at in your walk in your life yesterday? Can you go a little bit better than that today? Incremental improvement. I'm talking 1%. Can you step up your game a little bit? Can you be a little more faithful? Can you be a little bit more purposeful in your walk? Can you pray a little bit more? Can you invest yourself a little bit more in your family? Can you be a little bit more in your Bible? I bet you can. And if you compare yourself to where you were yesterday, you can strive to be just a little bit better today. And that incremental improvement is going to help us to walk out our Christian walk in today's day and age in a way that is actually impactful and makes a difference in the world and society at large. And that's fundamentally what we're trying to do. We're trying to do that. God's will be done, his kingdom come on earth here as it is in heaven. We're agents of change when it comes to that. And one of the primary ways we do that is through our own personal transformation, becoming a little bit better today than we were yesterday. And for that, I got to give Jordan Peterson A-. A-, guys. So, 4 rules thus far. I don't think his overall score in any category has been below an A-. So, guys, thus far, man, Jordan Peterson absolutely crushing. We're 1/3 of the way through the book, rules 1 through 4, and he's been doing great. I love this book. It's a great book, and he's obviously very wise. You know, there are little areas where I would make slight adjustments, but man, he's right on in so many ways. And so I really appreciate Jordan Peterson, and I appreciate interacting with him thus far on the book, and I hope you guys appreciate these interactions and commentaries. Of course, when it's all said and done, we're going to have all 24 of his rules, the first 12 rules from 12 Rules for Life, and then the next 12 rules from Beyond Order. We're going to have them all organized in one playlist on YouTube. So you can always reference whatever rule you're reading through and then go ahead and check it out in our videos. So that's the final goal of the thing. But I love what we've learned thus far. And for somebody who isn't, a biblical scholar, he's got a lot of really profoundly biblical ideas.